Tonight we're going to stretch the boundaries of Cleveland Heights ever so slightly north, and I'm sure that Nancy Adams will have a variety of ways that the East Cleveland Cemetery actually does connect with Cleveland Heights in historical ways, but strictly geographically speaking, we will be sliding ever so slightly out the borders. Nancy Fogel-West is our speaker tonight. She is Vice President and Assistant Secretary of the East Cleveland Township Cemetery Foundation, as well as the author of a new book which is available this evening called To Dwell with Fellow Clay, The Story of East Cleveland Township Cemetery. Her husband is selling books at the back of the room with only a slight profit margin built in for himself. The book, if you choose not to buy from him because he appears disreputable, is also available on Amazon.com and local bookstores, or just Amazon?
You can get it at local bookstores, but usually they'll have it ordered in for you.
I see. Okay, well, one way or another, we encourage you to pick up the book. I'm sure you'll find Nancy's presentation interesting. And with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to Nancy Adams.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. First, I want to thank Kara and Chris for inviting me here tonight to talk about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, the East Cleveland Township Cemetery. And, you know, Chris made reference to the fact that you're going to stretch your boundaries a little bit, but Cleveland Heights is a huge portion of the history of the East Cleveland Township Cemetery, and I'm going to try and bring that all together and explain to you tonight why this is a major portion of your history as a community. I first wandered into the cemetery back in 1999 because I had found that my great-grandfather's brothers and their families were buried in there, and when I walked in there, it was a disaster area. You know, it had been neglected and let go. It was a function of many years of articles in the newspapers about the condition that the cemetery was in. And I left there and I ended up taking a trip to Sweden, and I came back and having appreciated what the Swedes had done to preserve their heritage, and decided something needed to be done about this little 12-acre tract of land that had to have a story to tell. So I spent a year databasing the burial records, and during that time, the city of Cleveland filed a lawsuit against East Cleveland and Cleveland Heights for the condition of the chapel and an adjoining caretaker's house. And in the process then, Cleveland Heights and East Cleveland countersued the city of Cleveland, saying, wait, this isn't in the city of East Cleveland or Cleveland Heights anymore, and we don't have anything to do with it. And you know, despite the fact that the property had been annexed by the city of Cleveland in 1892. But everybody was kind of, you know, all the municipalities are stretched, you know, for dollars, and so as part of that, Bill Garrison, Alan Ford, and Dutch Harley created the East Cleveland Township Cemetery Foundation, and they got ownership of the cemetery as part of a settlement. And so what we've been doing now is renovating the cemetery so that the early residents of your community, Cleveland Heights, which was created out of a portion of East Cleveland and was known for several decades as the East Cleveland Heights Cemetery. East Cleveland and Cleveland Heights shared responsibility for maintaining, and it was kind of a joint effort. But there is a direct correlation and a direct relationship between the East Cleveland what's now known as the East Cleveland Township Cemetery in East Cleveland. And I'm wandering, and he's probably going to get mad at me back there. So as we start the story of the East Cleveland Township Cemetery, East Cleveland Township ceased to exist in the 1870s. But prior to that, it was started under an old law that allowed townships to create cemeteries with public money for burial purposes. So the cemetery was actually created in 1859, but its history actually begins, and you can trace it back. There were two cemeteries known as the East Cleveland Cemetery. There was one over on the corner of Doan's Corner, what was then known as Doan's Corners, which is now 105th and Euclid, and it was now referred to as the old Doan's Corner Cemetery. And a lot of the early burials were transferred from that little 1-acre plot of land into East Cleveland Township Cemetery. So some of the people you're going to meet tonight or hear about actually died prior to 1859, and they were transferred in there from the Doan's Corner Cemetery. And not going to have enough time tonight to go into that whole bit, but the whole cemetery and its history has been embroiled in litigation. Since its founding and even prior to that, because of some laws that became outdated and didn't address lot ownership as it relates to Doan's Corners. So just to leave a little mystery there so that maybe you'll want to read a little further. Where you see the sign here, the sign was added last year. The plot of land that is there, there's 3 plots of land that were purchased on East 118th Street. The original entrance to the cemetery was off of Euclid Avenue, almost right across from where Lakeview's main entrance is on Euclid. And it was moved in 1929 when the railroad bought that road, and the entrance to the cemetery was moved over onto 118th. When the foundation got ownership of the cemetery in 2003, one of the things that needed to come down was the caretaker's house. It was beyond repair, and those services were donated to the foundation, and we've since put in a garden. This is the burial chapel that was built in 1910. It will be 100 years old next year. It was designed by Frank Mead prior to him hooking up with Hamilton, and it was completed in 1910. One of the other trustees of the foundation is here tonight. He's in the back, Wayne Ryan. He and I and our respective families have renovated the chapel. It was actually taken over by squatters. When I went in there in 1999, there were squatters living in the chapel as well as living in the caretaker's house. The squatters have since gone. She was driving her Jag and living rent-free. But we have, all the woodwork in there was painted white. We went in and we stripped all the woodwork. We had a Boy Scout do a Eagle Scout project, and he came in and helped with the stripping. And so we put it back to where it was, and the chapel is now being used for a home for the foundation. This is the backyard. We just relayed the patio and dug that up. There's a sign at the main entrance that says restoration in progress. It gives you a telephone number if you'd like to volunteer or help out. The main gates, you see the garden, and we're now getting ready to head on into the cemetery. One of the headstones that you'll come to says Banks Custer. He is alleged to be a second cousin of George. I haven't been able to verify that, but rumor has it that he is a second cousin. We also have Buffalo Bill Cody's grandparents buried in the cemetery, and we have not been able to locate the headstone. I don't know why this is doing this, but we did, when I was searching around, all the soil in the cemetery is sandy, so a lot of the headstones tend to sink. So these are Buffalo Bill Cody's aunt and cousin. Their headstones had sunken 2 feet under the ground. In the back, along the railroad wall, you'll see a monument for Edward Hoffman. He was the conductor on the streetcar when there was the central viaduct that went over the Cuyahoga River, and there was a mechanism on the track that So when the bridge, it was a drawbridge, and when the drawbridge was coming up, if they needed to stop, it told them they needed to stop the car. Well, the security latch failed, and the streetcar, it was car 642, went into the Cuyahoga River with 20 or 25 people on board. And it was a Saturday morning. People were out shopping. They were heading into downtown to go do their shopping. And so Edward Hoffman was the conductor of the car that went off into the Cuyahoga. It was one of the worst. It happened in 1891, and it was the worst disaster that the city had seen at that particular point in time. This is Frederick Wilson. He was a brigadier general, not necessarily in a battle, but he was named as a brigadier general as part of the Ohio GAR. And he was also part of Wilson Mills. He had a Geist mill over on, Grist mill, thank you. Over by where Gates Mills is. And I think you all know Wilson Mills Road, so you can kind of follow that history. He's surrounded with, we've been replacing military markers, and his sons, you can see that they're the new markers for his sons who served in several of the wars is there. Willard Witt, am I saying that name right? He's a Cleveland Heights person. He's on one of your landmarks, the Willard Witt house, White's. He's buried in the cemetery. He was a farmer and had a fairly large plot of farming land that ended up being part of one of the larger developing allotments in Cleveland Heights. Does that sound familiar? Edwin Doody. Edwin Doody ran the streetcars in East Cleveland and Cleveland, starting back when they were drawn by horses. He was known for running streetcars in the Cleveland area for 40 years, and actually converted over to, was running the streetcars when they went to electric. So he spanned 40 years of time and saw the first streetcar that was horse-drawn up until the first streetcar that was powered by electricity. Silsby, you might remember that name. There's a lot of Silsbys in the cemetery. Wayne happens to be related to all of them. Frederick Silsby was one of the first trustees of the East Cleveland Cemetery back when it was initially formed in 1859. So he was one of the original trustees, along with a gentleman by the name of Tolbert, that were trustees. Kozad's probably another name that you know. Elias Kozad had the first tannery in town. He and his wife and his children are all buried around the monument that you see there, and there was a direct relationship to him and the Ford family, which is right next door. They were known for running the Underground Railroad in town and supporting that. Hezekiah Ford was the family matriarch, or the head of the Ford family that brought the family here. He was also a Revolutionary War veteran. We have 5 Revolutionary War veterans in the cemetery. He is surrounded by his sons. You've got Lewis Ford, Cyrus, and Cyrus's son Horatio. They were known for their farming. Yes?
Just curious, is that where Ford, the family after whom Ford wrote his name?
Exactly. And the Ford family is on our board. Alan Ford, the Ford family is still very prominent here in Cleveland, and Alan Ford is our chairman. And the Abington Foundation, which they own, or they established, actually provided the foundation with a $43,000 grant for safety and security several years ago. But the Fords were also very actively involved in running the Underground Railroad. They were also very unique farmers at the time, and really kind of broke away. They kind of led the charge as far as breaking away from the Presbyterian Church at the time that they felt couldn't make a strong enough stand against slavery. And they were very instrumental. In East Cleveland, one of the things that I didn't bring up yet, but there were never any racial, ethnic, or religious lines drawn in the cemetery. The cemetery was never dedicated under one religious orientation. And it was, I have to believe it was done on purpose, because I did extensive searching trying to find some indication that it was at some point dedicated, as most of the, even if you go to some of the city cemeteries, you see that there was a dedication ceremony, and that was never done. And you will see, if you walk through the cemetery, you will see, all kinds of, racial and ethnic and religious, differentiations on the markers, but there's no lines drawn. Everybody's, buried right next to everybody else. It just depended on where you bought your family plot.
The cemetery is north of Euclid?
It's north of Euclid, just about 750 feet maybe on your right-hand side. Dilley is another family name you probably know from Dilley Road. Asa Dilley was the first treasurer for Cuyahoga County, and he is well represented by most of his family around him. Charles Dilley was a veteran of the Civil War. He died at Andersonville Prison. If any of you are Civil War buffs, you'll know that, Andersonville was just horrendous Confederate prison, and people were dying from starvation because the Confederates just didn't have the money anymore to properly feed and house and take care of the Union prisoners. And Charles died in that prison. George Watkins is an interesting fellow. When I was doing my research, at first I didn't like him much, and then I decided maybe he's kind of more of an entrepreneurial spirit. He is one of the reasons why all of those Doan's Corners burials that I talked about earlier are in our cemetery. He hooked up with John Walters, who was buried not too far from him in the cemetery, and Judge Heisley. You might know Heisley Road. They decided that they were going to start buying up the land and the burial lots that were in the Doan's Corner Cemetery that was established in 1823. Because they thought, even at that point, that property on what's now 105th and Euclid was a very valuable 2-acre plot of land. And they thought, okay, if I can get ownership of this, and all I got to do is move these bodies, then I'm going to own this really expensive piece of land. And so he disinterred all these people and bought up all the land from the heirs and moved them all over here, and he moved a few someplace else. And the problem that came in is the Euclid Avenue Congregational Church at that point was also located on that piece of property, and it was originally set up as part of the Euclid Avenue Congregational Church that's now over on, I think it's 79th and Chester. And so they got in this legal battle, and the judge finally came down and said, Mr. Watkins, you're not acting on behalf of the trustees of the public, what was known as the public burying ground. You're acting on your own behalf. And by this time, Walters had died, Heisley had died, and Watkins is the only one left. And so all his work that they had worked on this for 50 years, basically went for nothing. And the Euclid Avenue Congregational Church eventually did prevail, and they sold the property to Cleveland Trust, and now it's, I think, a Cleveland Clinic parking garage. So, but Mr. Watkins, you've got to enjoy his entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, there was a loophole, and he tested it, and unfortunately, it failed.
Exactly where was that cemetery located currently, or what corner of 150 Euclid?
105th and Euclid on, I'm horrible with directions.
The Coli Clinic,
Ronald McDonald? I think it
Could it be where Cleveland Trust built?
I think it's, yeah, where Cleveland Trust, I think it's the northwest corner, yeah, the northwest, is it the northwest corner?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
But George came to Cleveland in 1818 with his father, and I mean, he lived here all his life. He was well known around town. And once you get past the fact that he was disinterring all these bodies and moving people, trying to, to make himself some money, there was a loophole, and it was a good try. You got to give the guy some credit. Another name you probably know is Doane. John Doane, Timothy Doane. Timothy was Nathaniel Doane's brother. Nathaniel Doane came with Moses Cleveland as part of the surveying party with Moses Cleveland. Timothy was a Revolutionary War veteran. He was the father of John. They were well known. You know Doane Brook. They were also very much in all of, these people are very closely buried in the cemetery, which the Doane family was also very much against slavery. And Timothy was a master on a export ship, and he would go to the West Indies and bring back materials. Well, he brought back one time a slave that he had purchased, and he got this person back to the United States, freed him, and that person, his name was I've seen Ummy in the census records. He's listed as a family member. I firmly believe that he is buried in the cemetery with the rest of the Doane family. There is no marker. However, he would have predated, he disappears after the 1850 census. So I think he died somewhere between, 1850 and 1860, because was 75 years old in 1850. But even the Doane family firmly believes that is buried in the cemetery with the rest of the Doane family. Alfred Blue was one of our Civil War vets that was one of our Buffalo soldiers. He was part of the colored troops. He was in an unmarked grave. We've marked his grave. His wife, Sarah, is next to him, along with his daughter, Lulu. When I was researching Sarah, because I couldn't find a whole lot on Alfred, what I found was her death certificate that indicated that her father was the slave owner from the plantation that she worked on in Kentucky. It just kind of, makes you take pause for a second. Right next door is Asa Caddy. Asa Caddy was the vice president of the Cuyahoga County Anti-Slavery Movement, or society, and I believe his home is on your landmark, one of your landmarks too? Yes? This is just a view of the cemetery right off of where Asa Caddy is, just to kind of give you a general idea of what the cemetery looks like, as you're looking around. As we move on back into the back end of the cemetery, this is the marker for Adidonja and Rodolphus Edwards. Now, what that mother was thinking when she named that child Rodolphus, I have no idea. This marker, Rodolphus. Everybody gonna rush home and go name your next child Rodolphus? Adidonja, his father was, Adidonja. Huh? Adidanja was one of our Revolutionary War veterans, and they came to Cleveland. Rodolphus was one of the, again, surveyors that came with Moses Cleveland. He also ended up being Cleveland's first mayor. In 1802, there was a meeting held, and they decided that the city needed someone to guide them, and at that point, they weren't calling them mayors, though, they called them chairmans. But Rodolphus was known as Uncle Dolph, and his wife was Aunt Dolph. And there are stories that, I found that indicated that, he would ride his, horse and buggy into town and go to the local tavern, and, his horse and the dog, his dog would lay in the wagon and wait for him to come out. And when he came out, he'd sit down, when he was in his more advanced years, he'd fall asleep once he got in the wagon, and the horse and the dog would take him home. So he is, that monument was actually moved from the old Doan's Corner Cemetery. There are pictures that I found in the newspaper, and you can see where it stood at the old Doan's Corner Cemetery, and so that headstone is very old. There were also some near battles over, before Rodolphus died, of moving that monument, and he threatened to kill anybody that touched it. So they ended up having to wait until the family members died off before they actually disinterred and moved the bodies along with the headstone out of the old cemetery. Alexander Swain is another one of our Buffalo Soldiers. Buffalo Soldiers, does anybody know what Buffalo Soldier means? They were blacks. They were named that after, by the Indians, because the Indians, you're right, because of their hair. They felt that, the blacks' hair resembled that of the buffalo, and so that's why the Indians named them Buffalo Soldiers. We have, if you remember, I think it was last year, there was the 100th anniversary, or the 200th anniversary, 100th anniversary of the Collinwood School fire. We have 16 of the children that died in the Collinwood School fire. There were 172 children, and that included a couple teachers and one firefighter that died as they were trying to escape the building. And this is just, a headstone showing that, they remembered it, they perished in the Collinwood School fire was 2 sisters. Charles Asa Post, that's maybe a name if you're history buffs that you'll know. He wrote the book, Doan's Corners and the 4 Miles East. The Post family was one of the first families transferred out of the public burying ground into East Cleveland Township Cemetery. And Charles Asa Post is also buried right next to the family monument. Looking off, it's just another view into the cemetery, just to kind of give you an idea of what the grounds look like. We have 3 mausoleums. The one that you can see no, that's not the right one. There's 3 mausoleums. That's the Hale Mausoleum. We've been currently doing some work on one. When we acquired the cemetery, one of the roofs, it was a Moses Mausoleum. The roof had actually just caved in. It was an old slate roof. And the weeds had just taken over, and it had gone wild. And since then, well, just this past weekend, we got a roof back on it. This is a corner lot in the middle of the cemetery. There used to be a receiving vault, and Wayne and his son and one of the other trustees have been working to raise this bumper. Some of those pieces, according to Wayne, and he's the engineer in the group, has calculated that each of those pieces of bumper weighed about, was it 600 pounds each? And so with a tractor, they've been raising and renovating the lot. That is not a tree that you see there. This right here, that's actually a monument. And we have several of those in the cemetery. Oops, come back. And it's, go back. Just to kind of give you an idea of some of the sculpture that you'll actually find. Ebenezer Doody, who was Edwin Doody, you met Edwin Doody a little earlier. Ebenezer made the first bricks in Cuyahoga County in the Western Reserve and supplied the bricks to the Ohio Penitentiary when it was built in 1813 for the first Ohio Pen. Seth Cogswell Baldwin is another one of the Revolutionary War veterans, but he was also one of the surveyors that came with Moses Cleveland. He is known for having surveyed most of the property in the, in the farms in the Cuyahoga County area and the Western Reserve area. Because everything in the Western Reserve was surveyed into either 100 or 10-acre lots, and they did it by links and chains. Okay? And so he was the one that did most of that. The marker that's right behind him is his marker. You can't hardly read it, and so we had gotten him a replacement marker so that it wasn't lost. One of your early mayors, William G. Farr, he is not buried in the cemetery. However, his family, his mother and father are, along with some of the other Farr members of the family. I'm not quite sure where William is buried, but he was your mayor from 1912 to 1914. Some more Silsbys. They're multiplying. Sylvester was a veteran of 2 wars. He was a veteran of the Civil War as well as the Spanish-American War. This is an interesting marker. Can't tell you anything about the family. But what I recently found out was this marker used to be sold by Sears and Roebuck. They were in the monument business. This is one of our most photographed monuments. Mrs. Gillette died with no children. Her husband obviously had to have cared a lot about her to have this kind of a monument erected in her honor. And there's really not a whole lot that, from a historical standpoint that you can find on her other than, they were just very unassuming, but he built this monument and had it placed on her grave. He is not buried there.
The Sears and Roebuck monument, is it one of those metal ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can only find them, from what I understand, I did some research, they have some old catalogs, but you've got to really, they're going to cost you some money to try and to look at them, but if you do Google, you can find that somebody out there has collected some of these old Sears and Roebuck monument catalogs when they used to sell them by mail order.
Well, they last well.
Yeah, they just look a little green.
The Doe monument has an E on the end of his name, and I've seen it spelled without the E.
Good eye. Nathaniel Doan's family dropped the E, Timothy's kept it. So the 2 brothers did a little bit different. If you talk to the Doan family, they say it should be without the E, depending on which Doan family you talk to, because there's still Doans living here. And we actually, several years ago, did a Memorial Day ceremony that we honored our Revolutionary War veterans. And one of the other Doan descendants came up from Georgia. And so she's adamant that you need to drop the E. However, you see the monument with the E, and early explanations were that Nathaniel's family dropped it and Timothy's kept it. Lucian Gunn is the grandson of Elijah Gunn, Elijah was one of the original surveyors that came with Moses Cleveland again. His father, Horace, delivered the first mail into Cleveland from the Akron area on horseback. Lucian was a farmer, but he also did some side work as a charcoal burner for the railroad, and passed away very young in life because he ended up getting run over by a railroad car. Just another view of the cemetery to kind of give you a bird's eye view of the grounds. Alonzo Silsby is another Civil War veteran. If you look at the date of his death, he was wounded and died because of the wounds he received at Gettysburg. We put a new marker next to him. The one standing next to him was, the older one. This one here is the one that was originally placed there for him, and we put the new one so that, we didn't lose track of the fact that he was there as the old stone continues to fade. Severance. Now there's a name. How common of a name is that? I can't find any link to John Severance. They may be second cousins, third cousins. There is some relationship there. They came from the same part of the country, but this Severance, Malvern Severance's father died very young, and so I wasn't able to put it together, but there could be a Severance relationship. The Yee family is a old Cleveland Heights family. Their descendants actually were just in the cemetery a couple weeks ago. We've taken pictures and included this on our walks for several years now because of the sculpture and the anchor that's there, and the anchor tends to indicate that you're anchored in the here and now, and that and you're still grounded, and you still have some ties to to the earth. Apparently, the Yee brothers had an interior design company here in Cleveland Heights for many decades, and I could not find, they were just in the cemetery recently, and so I haven't had enough time yet to really uncover and determine where, in fact, their interior design company was. And I'm sure you all know Quilliams, Quilliams Road. William and his father, Frederick, who was the doctor that was here for 42 years. The Quilliams are buried near the entrance of the cemetery. And he, again, William was a veteran. Apparently Frederick was a surgeon and was well known throughout the community, and having been a surgeon in the Cleveland area for, a number of decades. And I found his obituary on the New York Times. And our first burial was a Mr. Duncan. On August 31st, 1859. The deed got filed to the cemetery the same day he got buried. So we've chosen August 31st, 1859 to serve as our official anniversary, or the day that the cemetery came into being. Another view going back into the back end of the cemetery where we've just been. And I just want to thank you for having us. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, ma'am.
When was the last burial in the cemetery?
We did 3 last year.
Oh, you've been in business.
Huh?
You're back in business.
We're not selling lots, but we're doing burials if the family already owns the lot. And they've all been cremains. But yes, last year, we've had, people stayed away for a long time because, it was just, it was so let go, and there apparently were wild dogs in there, and, but people are coming back in groves. I know, all of us that, are trustees that are working over there every Sunday, we get all choked up because we watch the flowers coming, and we just see people coming back, and it just really makes us feel good because we're over there every Sunday doing grounds maintenance. We're all volunteers, and, it just really makes us all feel real good. Yes, ma'am.
How many people are buried here altogether?
Approximately 18,000.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of stacking going on. Which wasn't uncommon back then, and, it's, yes, sir.
Where are the records kept for? Are they kept in the East Cleveland City garage or where?
No, we moved them. They are now over in the chapel. We got ownership of that when we got ownership of the property. All the burial records have been scanned and databased, and we have a website up. It's just they're not on the website right now. I brought them down to update. So they are on the internet, and we do have all the burial records at the chapel, and we're there on Sundays.
You used to be on Brooks Way.
Correct. Wayne actually set us up with our own website. It's ectcf.org. It's the same website, except I pulled it down to move it over to the new website and to update because I was augmenting the burial records with funeral home records from Western Reserve. There was a fire in the chapel at one point, and some of the records got destroyed, so the records aren't complete, so I've been trying to augment them to get them as complete as possible. Yes, ma'am.
In your research, what were some of the names of the funeral homes? Are there something you would recognize now?
Boyd,
Yes.
Monreal, Zeem. What's the one up on 55th that just closed? House of Wills. The stories is they used to, when, they do the funerals for the African Americans, they'd come rolling down East 118th Street when the Saints go marching in, just blaring out of the back of the car. So we've often threatened to do that as part of one of our walks. We're multicultural. Yes, ma'am.
Do you still have land space available for new purchases, new burials?
No, we don't. Correct. We're a 501c3, which means, and we're operating as a charitable trust. We legally can't sell interment rights, but if somebody already owns interment rights, we'll bury them. But we can't legally sell burial rights. So we're basically acting as strictly a 501c3. Yes, sir.
How was your organization funded?
We beg really well. There was, when we got ownership of the cemetery, there had been an endowment. And the money, there were several $100,000 at the time when things started to deteriorate in 1929. And so by the time we got ownership of it in 2003, there was $32,000 left. We still have about $25,000 of it left. We've set up an endowment at the Cleveland Foundation. We don't pull from that endowment. There's only about $10,000 in there. We don't pull from there. We basically, fund our ongoing expenses from trustee donations and/or donations from family members that we ask for support every year, and we can cover our operating expenses through that. So we leave everything else to just kind of in case of something happens. When I came in last year, we got hit hard. And luckily we do have insurance, so that covered a lot of it, but we had 6 or 7 trees that came down. It didn't cause any damage to any of the headstones, but you can imagine, you saw the trees, they're huge.
Oh, yeah.
One of those trees coming down is major work.
Well, your organization is really to be commended because because I remember going back and seeing the one mausoleum with the roof had caved in on it.
Oh, wasn't that horrible?
And there were dogs there and a lot of beer bottles and everything else. It's a pretty scary place really at the time.
Yeah.
And it looked like someone had just walked away from it,
Yeah,
basically. So I know the kind of work that you guys must have had to do
Yeah.
to bring it to the way it is now.
so, and we've, you know,
Great.
I mean, we're now part of University Circle, Inc., and so, I mean, they extended their borders over, so UCI police are in there on a regular basis. They come through on the horses. They know that we're not there. They help us with the gate opening. East Cleveland still opens and closes the gates on, during the week for us. Cleveland Heights was a huge resource to us when we were first getting started, because part of the settlement that came out of this is the 3 cities agreed to help us with grounds maintenance for the first 5 years. You guys are the ones that stepped up to the plate the most often. I mean, I had Andre in your service department on speed dial, and if I needed something, Andre was there. So, yeah, I can't, you know, East Cleveland's done what it could, and we'll just leave it go at this. You guys were great. Cleveland is still kind of going, not my problem. But they come in now and help too. I mean, now that we're away from the whole cemetery, the people that were taking care of the cemetery, Randy Scott at the City of Cleveland, who's Commissioner of Streets, I mean, he's over there. I mean, we need branches picked up, he sends somebody out. So we still have the support of the cities with as much as they can do, so, and we appreciate all that. Yes, sir.
What big renovation or restoration challenges are still ahead of you? What's like tops on your priority list?
Tree pruning. The trees are the thing that, you know, I mean, that's, and raising headstones. I mean, because the soil is so sandy, everything sinks. And the headstones that you see sunk or toppled over are not being toppled over because of vandals. It's because of age, and it's because the ground is sinking underneath them. So, I mean, it's a lot of heavy physical labor, and those are the 2 big things. I mean, we've got some major trees that we need to bring down before they come down, and just trying to keep everything pruned. And we need another tractor. If anybody's got a tractor. Yes.
I just wondered, what can you do to prevent the current headstones from it's still sandy?
What we're doing is we're putting a base of 411 gravel underneath them, just because a lot of them were just sat on the soil. And you've got to figure it's taken them 150 years to sink to the levels that they're at. So, you know, we're just trying to build it up with a good base of 411 gravel so that it'll drain, but at the same time provide a base for it. And the 411 gravel's fairly inexpensive. Yes, sir.
If one knows of an individual buried there, is there a map?
Are there maps?
Yeah, you find a specific grave?
Wayne, one of the trustee in the back that's doing the happy dance, and our engineer, he redrew them all with CAD, because the maps that we were using were done under the WPA project. So we took those maps, Wayne redrew them all so that they're clear, and then we took and we put some of the family, because a lot of the cemetery was built on the whole premise of a garden-style cemetery, and so there are family lots. And so we put the names on some of the lots to help people find, to point you in the right direction. So if you found one marker and you could see it on the map, then it would point you in the direction, because everything is very circular in there. This is not a grid, you know, square blocks, you know, where you've got just defined rows. Everything is going in a circular pattern, even though the cemetery is kind of in a triangle pattern. And it makes mowing real easy, or not very easy, and kind of challenging, but it's, you know, it was really meant to be more of a social thing. I mean, people would go to the cemeteries and have picnics, and we still have, there are several families that come in on Memorial Day, and they bring their lawn chairs, and they sit and they visit with their departed relatives. It's really kind of neat.
How did you pick those nice military markers?
The federal government will, as long as you can prove that, give them the information, they will give you the marker. And so what we've been doing is, showing them that either the marker is unreadable or the grave is unmarked, and they ship them to us. And then each one of those is about 400 pounds each, 350, 400 pounds, and so we manually haul them out to the cemetery, and we dig a hole where they're supposed to be, and we set them. And Wayne's daughter is here in the audience somewhere. She's actually working on trying to finish up that project while she's in the country. Thank you very much.
Okay, couple closing comments or observations. First of all, I want to make sure that everybody has grasped the irony of a wonderful presentation about dead people and the fact that the slide images move on their own. I thought that was kind of cute. It also occurred to me as Nancy was talking that there were even far more Cleveland Heights connections than I'm sure most of us were aware of, including at least 4 or 5 families for whom the houses they lived in are still standing, some in Cleveland Heights and some outside. Katie was one, Cozad, which obviously is not Cleveland Heights. The Silsby house, which is technically in University Heights, the farmhouse is still standing at the corner of Silsby and South Taylor, and the William Quilliams house, which is more or less at the corner of, what is it, Noble and Quilliams? Something like that. And I think there was one more at the very beginning that I've failed to notice. It also occurred to me that this is a wonderful reminder of how far, a little old, somewhat isolated cemetery can actually stretch in terms of countrywide influence. We have Buffalo Soldiers going all the way out west, Andersonville to the south, north via the Underground Railway, and east all the way to the Revolutionary War. So this is truly more of a, I don't want to say global, but let's say national presentation than maybe any of us anticipated. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. We hope you'll join us for upcoming sessions, and we hope you all have a pleasant evening. So thank you again for coming.